Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first video in a series called The Death of Marvel. The video is also technically the second and the last part of the Shang-Chi series, promised by myself in the previous Shang-Chi video. However, comparing to the previous Reiji format, this one would not include any vulgar language, as this serves as an academic-like analysis of the movie after I have calmed down from my rage. If you wish to hear about the characters, the plot, the settings, and the theme, this video is for you. I will also be drawing comparisons with the other movies that are relevant to the topics that will be discussed. On top of that, I will also go into details of why I think this movie misrepresents Chinese cultures, and potentially on why it is racist due to the amount of research actually put into the movie. By no means do I hold a stance of professional authority in this video, so feel free to disagree. I would also take into consideration that this isn't necessarily a follow-up video to the previous. There shouldn't be the need to watch that video for the context of this one. And this video will be formatted to fit the people who likes to listen to long videos as podcasts, as they will not be missing pure visual context. Throughout this video, you will most likely be hearing repeating events, complaints, and criticisms. This is unfortunately unavoidable due to the selected style of presentation, being an exploration of each element of storytelling. And when you do hear repeating parts, just note that there are probably issues in both categories. Because of the academic stance this video will be taking, there will be less comedic value within this video. And so just my voice doesn't bore you out, I have also included audio clips of my friends with their opinions of this movie, planted throughout this video. And with that, my dear audiences, I recommend you strapping in because this will be a long one. If you only enjoy videos that were made for entertainment, I would not recommend this video to you. Rather, you can go watch my 1 hour long rage video for more enjoyment. The point of this video is to break the movie down into its essence and objectively analyze it, to see what should or should not be done in storytelling. I can't tell the people what to do in writing a story, but I am here to provide with good and bad examples, and I am leaving the ultimate conclusions up to you. I know that the term objectivity is a well-debated topic, especially when it comes to media quality. Personally, I believe in objective analysis. However, I don't believe one can be truly objective, but not in the sense that one cannot truly remove their opinion from a certain statement. Taking that into consideration, I believe if and only if the basis of the statement is founded on a fact and logic is used to deduct further statements, then the statement can be objective. Let's take painting as an example, since art is widely considered to be an area that cannot be objectively analyzed. Taking Mona Lisa as an example, let's say hypothetically we find in Da Vinci's journal he wrote that he spent a month redrafting and perfecting the hands of Mona Lisa, and while only spending about a day on the sky. Based on this hypothetical fact established, it is evident to say that Da Vinci cared to make the hands look good, while caring less about the sky. And with that, it is reasonable to deduct that the hands were objectively better painted than the sky. Now, if something were found to disprove my initial statement about the amount of time spent, the established statements would then also be false. If instead I said, I think Da Vinci spent a month painting the hands and a day on the sky, it also isn't reasonable to make the statement I had, because it is just my opinion, not an established fact. When facts can be established, objectivity can be reached. Now, regarding my statement earlier about one cannot truly be objective, in order for something to be truly objective, every piece of the content should be examined as equally attended as all others. If one scene is used specifically to show the movie has bad characters, all other scenes should also be examined to determine the overall quality of the characters. If and only if that is done, the analysis can be called truly objective. Now that would completely dilute the focus of the analysis, and make most of the analysis pointless. The selected parts to be analyzed would represent the issues and what to avoid in writing a story. I do not claim my work to be truly objective, nor do I even think the entirety of my analysis can be categorized as objective. I select a few focal points to be analyzed. They do not represent the entirety of the movie in every moment and in every category. Though, when enough evidence is compiled, one can come to some conclusion. Whether my examples convinces you or not, it is up to you, and I welcome you to let me know in the comments if one of these sections didn't convince you. It is ultimately my fault for not laying the evidence out more overtly. I strive to do better in future videos. Now that is established, let's go back to the movie. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is the second movie of Phase 4 MCU. A movie franchise that most people do think has peaked a few years back in terms of attention. Shang-Chi has been praised by critics, fans, and just people in general. If you would like to take Rotten Tomato as an example, not that I'm saying it is a credible source of validation, but a whopping score of 91% was given by the critics and 98% by the audience. I won't be comparing the score to the movies of other genres because the scores can be relative, so let's only compare it with other MCU movies. What this score means is that the movie will be solidly placed above Infinity War, Civil War, the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, the Sony Marvel collaboration Spider-Man movies, and pretty much 90% of all MCU content. If you're watching this video, you probably have seen some of these Marvel movies that I have mentioned. While there are some quality movies like Iron Man and The Avengers, this movie is definitely not amongst them. Honestly, this is a quite disturbing sight to see. Not only are the scores from these so-called professional critics, but also from the general audience. Marvel, along with the general audience, has branded this movie with the title a box office triumph. Despite articles everywhere saying Shang-Chi broke all kinds of records, the movie actually performed horribly at the box office, being surpassed by most Marvel movies, and by the most recent Bond movie within a few days of release.
Because I mean, it's a, we did well. It's a lot of money, and it's the #1 movie in the world. Yeah. But Marvel movies make like billions of dollars, and yeah, the fact that like we have ours and it made 160, which is great, amazing, right? But like, they usually make $1 billion.
You are absolutely right, Simu. Your movie made far less than $1 billion, and kind of far from $500 million as well. And just to use another example, I didn't think the production process of this video would be dragged on for this long, but if you will look at the box office for Spider-Man No Way Home, I don't think more words need to be said there. Let's set the box office argument aside, since I really don't think the box office has anything to do at all with the quality of a movie. Lots of movies that are now considered as classics did not perform well at the box office during release. Movies like The Thing and Blade Runner are all great movies that did not perform well financially. On the other hand, Shang-Chi is nowhere near the quality of what is suggested by the ratings. Usually, if you see a score above 90%, it is fair to say it is one of the best. But this movie would not even be in the top 50% of all movies. Seriously, if you haven't watched this movie, don't even bother. It is not worth spending 2 hours of your life on this insulting piece of flying garbage. Watch something good, something like The Father or Nobody, or even No Way Home, cause that is a way more enjoyable movie than this one will ever be. So are lots of other movies. Or you can continue watching this video instead, because this will be more educational and more useful than the movie that was funded by nearly $200 million. Now, this is the point where I will usually stop and give you guys a spoilers warning, but I don't think it is needed. Well, first, you don't actually miss much by not watching the movie, and second, if you are here, most likely you have already watched the movie. But hey, here's the warning anyways. The following content spoils the plot of Shang-Chi. I want to spend some time exploring the problem of modern professional critics. And let's only narrow them to movies because other areas of entertainment could be very different. What are the point of movie critics? Well, traditionally they provide evidence-based opinions or arguments to whether a movie is good or bad, which ultimately determins whether a lot of people will go to the theaters to see the movie or not. Let's take a look at these comments from the top critics for Shang-Chi. From Mark Kermode, the first half of the film is better, and I liked it much more than I was expecting. From TT Stern NZ, great action. Simu Liu is a great kind of charismatic center for the film. And from Charlotte O'Sullivan, Shang-Chi and Katie are my new best friends. These top critics' comments inspire me so much that I want to see the movie again because of them. I'm only on my 10th watch of the movie now, please send help. These comments offer nearly nothing at all. On the other hand, this might be a poor representation of the critics, as I chose to exclude all the ones that actually says something about the movie to make this point. But it doesn't stray from the fact that these comments that I showed you, comments from the top critics, have some words but nothing to say. It is one thing if critics are not interested enough to comment at all, and it is another when they do comment but ultimately say very little or nothing. Nothing can be learned from these critics, nothing is contributed to the conversation. They are just there to give a good score. This makes me and many other people suspect that these critics are just people who are paid by the corporations to say good things about something they don't even care about.
So I'm gonna pay you $100
If you are familiar with the movies of the recent decade, you would know that this is definitely not the first time critics have given false scores. The Joker movie and Star Wars The Last Jedi are all solid proofs of this phenomenon. This is only what was laid out on Rotten Tomato, but I can assure you that the other sides of the metric of the quality of movies are not much better than this. To think that these dim-witted, unsubstantiated comments are the ones to judge if most people are going to watch the movie or not is absolutely unacceptable. I encourage people to think for themselves and formulate opinions based on evidence. And this goes for the critics too. Well, now that we're on the same page with the issue of modern critics, let's not waste any more time and beat the dead horse once more because my production speed was so slow. To be completely fair, YouTube isn't my full-time, it's not even my part-time. Since everyone keeps talking about this movie for having a great villain, we're going to start with the characters. This movie introduces many characters, but it does not overwhelm people like a certain other Marvel movie released the same year. I would say this is about the right amount of new main characters you can introduce without disrupting the experience of the audience by diluting the screen time across 10 different actors and trying to portray them as all equally main characters. Of course, naturally, some of the characters in Shang-Chi are more well written than the others, and some are just straight lacking in, well, character. Characters like Sue and Katie's brother Rui-Wen exist simply to exist. They don't exactly serve any functions, which is completely fine. Well, besides existing to prove the stereotype that Asians can't drive. This will be discussed again when I talk about Katie. But the stasisness of these characters are not the ones that I mentioned that do not have character. I will return to this later when I cover less important characters. And let's talk about the more important ones for now. Since a big theme of this movie is family, let's talk about the family. The family of Wenwu, Yingli, Shang-Chi, and Xialing. The family consists of a father that tells his men that they can try to kill his son. A mother that does essentially nothing except for installing a map that becomes useful decades in the future. A son that abandons his sister and wants to kill his dad. A sister that is just an asshole and knows how to train in martial arts by watching. What a lovely family. Now of course, what I have said about them is extremely simplified. So let's dig in a bit more. Wenwu has been praised by certain people as the best villain of the MCU. And I get genuinely confused when people say that, because he's neither the best nor a villain at all. For sure, he is supposed to be an antagonist in the story, and Disney Marvel didn't paint him as a very nice character on the surface. But that is not enough to say that he is a villain. The classic definition of villain is someone who is evil and important to the plot, with the main point being evil, and Wenwu exhibit nearly no evil. Well, the idea of evil can be subjective, so take it with a grain of salt. Throughout most of the plot, Wenwu searches to restore his broken family, by any means necessary. In most of the scenes he appears in, he was not shown as evil, not even as strict as the stereotypical Asian dad. My dad was more strict than him when he was younger. But let's not bring in anecdotes. In the first scene where Shang-Chi and Xia sees their father after years of separation, all Wenwu says is, "I miss you so much, my son. Let's go home." A very warm welcome to Shang-Chi. Of course, most modern villains do not have to exhibit overtly evil characteristics, like Thanos, but usually at some point of the movie, they show the evil side of the character. For Thanos, that was when he manually killed half of Gamora's people. You cannot argue that is not evil, even if it is justified in his head. After all, most villains wouldn't see themselves as villains. One can argue Wenwu shows that as well, with his comments of him willing to burn down the village where his wife came from. I will give merit to the people who do try to argue that, but what does Wenwu have in his mighty army of 7 cars to burn down the village? Is it the electrically charged bola shooting crossbows? Or is it the electrically charged Go, the Chinese hook swords? What part of his army can burn things down? I mean, there are machine gun looking objects on top of the armored cars, but they don't use them in the movie. And they are barely actually noticed. This shows that even with the harsh words Wenwu gave, he had made sure his men would not have the equipment to do what he ordered them to do. While we are on this specific topic about the equipment of the 10 rings and Wenwu's orders, let me mention the fact that when Wenwu is getting his son back, he said to his son,
"I told my men they wouldn't be able to kill you if they tried. Glad I was right."
No wonder he had the balls to give such an order for allowing his men to try to kill his son, when he simply wanted the men to bring Shang-Chi back. He did not even equip his army with gears that can kill. This was shown in this short scene where one of the 10 ring soldiers strikes Shang-Chi with his hook sword, and all it did was to shock Shang-Chi for a tiny second so he drops Katie. The shock was not even enough to make people incapacitated like the taser guns used by the police. Shang-Chi recovered from the shock faster than a rabbit can defecate. Wenwu designed his army to be undergeared with non-lethal weapons, just so he can deliver arrogant stupid lines at the expense of the lives of some of his men. Men who are so loyal they're willing to go into fights knowing their weapons are not designed to kill. Good villains have good motivations, and since Wenwu is viewed as a prime candidate by many of the audience, let's break down his motivation. Indeed, Wenwu was the character who stole the movie from most of the audience. His motivation is rather questionable. Wenwu lost his wife when his rival gang raided his house. There is an extreme amount of incompetence within that sentence, like how a guy who has conquered the world from the shadows has a rival gang. And how did they even find his house when his organization was so secretive? Also, not to say why in the world Wenwu was out doing shopping in the middle of the night. These are details anyone can catch if they just pause the movie and think for a moment. But I guess none of the people in the pitch meeting picked them up. Anyways, back to Wenwu. He was consumed by grief after he let his children leave him, so he started researching ways to bring his wife back. And he was tricked by the Dweller in Darkness to search for a way to enter Ta Lo, because he was so convinced that his wife is behind a gate the people of Ta Lo are guarding. So what are the issues? Let's start with the motivation that moves the plot. His belief of his wife being alive behind the gate. Okay, so we know that he was influenced by the Dweller in Darkness to think that his wife is alive. Not only is that stupid, it can also be easily avoided if he just decided to visit the grave of his wife. Since the children were still young at the time of the mother's death, Wenwu was most likely aware of where his wife was buried. Maybe he even buried her himself. He would realize his wife is dead because the body is still there, 6 feet underground. Wenwu isn't stupid. A stupid person would not be able to conquer the world from the shadows. Though other YouTubers have evidence saying that he isn't smart with all the decisions. I'm not going to dig into that area as it would be too long, even for this video. Even at times when Wenwu is consumed by grief, which would not be years after the death of his wife, he should not be so easily persuaded by something that can't be broken down with a simple action. This shows the incompetence of writers in generating a logical motivation for the progression of the plot. However, what they did well is to consistently stick to the same motivation throughout the movie. That is why it seemed like the motivation was a good part of the character. Some YouTubers out there, not pointing any fingers, also praised the design of his weapon. Indeed, it is one of the more interesting weapons, as weapons were never too focused in the MCU. Many also hated it because how different they are from the comics and how these things shouldn't even be called rings. But that isn't the focal point. The real issue is with the strengths and weaknesses of the weapon. It is very vague throughout the movie. We know that it can boost your punches, extend your life, be thrown around, and are physically indestructible. They are in fact not like the ring in the comics, where each ring gives the wearer one specific power. It is understandable why they did not stay true to the comics, due to the similarities in concept they had with the Infinity Stones. But this also removes the possibility of seeing a very cool combination of powers from the rings. And now all the rings do is punch hard and can be thrown around. Since I mentioned the history of the rings, let's talk about how the title of the movie is a lie. The movie only gives about 4 lines of information about the rings themselves, so the title, The Legend of the Ten Rings, isn't exactly accurate, is it? Instead, we have a post-credit scene that informs us that the actual legend will probably be explored in a sequel movie. I also personally take some issues with the word legend being used, but I can let that slide. Enough about that. I don't wish to nitpick further on something that is mostly subjective. Just note that there is so little established with the weapons, and expect them to be able to do anything in the future. Though Wenwu's character is a mess, the functional parts as well as Tony Leung's performance is okay enough for this character to get a pass. But one okay character doesn't mean the whole character section is fine. Next up is the mother of the family, the character that is very important to the plot and was barely in the movie. Yingli is a character the writers decided to use as a plot device. The whole plot of the movie revolves around Wenwu's delusional thoughts about bringing her back from the dead. I'm not going to question how she fell in love with someone like Wenwu, who tried to kill her. As unlikely as it should be, it is possible to happen within the limits of logic. Now, allow me to sum up what the mother Yingli did for the plot. Yingli married Wenwu in 1996, and immediately told the people to construct a map to Ta Lo, made of magic water. Or she did it herself, which isn't unbelievable. A map that can only be revealed after placing the 2 green gems in the eye sockets of the wooden dragon sculpture. She managed to hide the map from Wenwu, but remembered to leave notes in her diary on how to use it. She then gave birth to not 1, not 3, but 2 babies, so she could give one of the 2 green gems, now necklaces, to each children. She made sure to inform the kids that the gems would bring them home, not specified where, and not inform them of how the gems should be used. There's also a minor issue regarding the logistics of the map and if it can possibly be understood, but that isn't important in this section. Later, Yingli's sister Yingnan also tells us Yingli probably visited Ta Lo after the children were born, as Yingnan knew the existence of the children, and Yingli most likely also suggested her own death, as she would only tell her sister to prepare stuff when she couldn't bring her own children to Ta Lo herself. You can see how the writers stretched out a single idea into this monstrosity, simply because they needed her to play a bigger role than her character actually was. Because she wasn't in the movie for very long, it is easy for the writers to push everything onto her, while making nearly no logical sense. Oh, we need a map to Ta Lo, put it on the mom. Oh, we need a key to the map, put it on the mom. Oh, how does Wenwu not know the mom hid it from him? How does Wenwu find out? Show him pointing at some notes that are probably left behind by the mom. How did her sister Yingnan know about her kids? Well, I don't know. I don't even think the writers know themselves. A preposterous amount of triggers to the plot progression was placed on Yingli. And that is without including the influence from the Dweller in Darkness pretending to be her. I don't think I need to detail the reasons why this phenomenon isn't preferable in storytelling. It is simply unconvincing how all of this happened, how all of these can be connected to one person that was barely in the movie. Now the plot device characters out of the way, let's dig into the character with the title of the movie, Shang-Chi. Most of the audience views Shang-Chi as a generic hero. While not possessing any superpower, he keeps fighting for what he believes in and eventually gains superpower through a magic item. That is one of the generic arcs of heroes, and is certainly what the writers thought as well. So they decided to start adding in flavors that would eventually ruin the character. The first flavor they decided to add to Shang-Chi is to have a dark past, which in fact is a thematic through line. More on that later. Shang-Chi had a sweet childhood with his mom and dad as well as his sister. When the mom died by the hands of a rival gang of Wenwu, that sweet childhood died along with her. Wenwu began training Shang-Chi to be an assassin. In his own words,
"From sunup to sundown, I was taught every possible way to kill a man. At the time I was 14, I could barely remember what life was like before she died."
He was then assigned with the job of killing the person who killed his mother. Pause on that for a moment. The fact that Wenwu has waited for so many years to deal with the man who killed his wife says something about his character. That he doesn't really care to kill the man who took his ultimate happiness from him. So this means his son is probably more important than his love. This is in direct contrast to what he says in this scene.
But when I met their mother, everything changed. She showed me a part of myself I didn't know was there. It was like I was seeing the world for the first time. She gave up everything so we could be together, and so did I. After all those years, I finally found something worth growing old for.
Back to Shang-Chi, he was sent by his father on his first assignment, and the assignment is to kill the man who killed his mother, and to end it for the both of them. Shang-Chi went through with the kill, but his guilt overwhelmed him and he realized nothing would bring his mother back, not even killing the man who was responsible. So he ran away, abandoning his sister to escape his father's palm, because he thinks that is his only chance to escape. And now in modern day, he thinks his father is some supervillain. When it comes to time to tell Katie about his past, he had already repressed that part of the memory so far, he does not remember whether he killed the man or not, and he rather believes he didn't. Now, if you have watched the movie, you would realize what I have said was all written by me and me alone, from what was extremely vaguely inferred in the movie. I have constructed a compelling character motivation from one line in the movie. We do not know why he abandoned his sister. We do not know why he started to think his father is evil. We do not know why he lied to Katie. These are all meaningful character decisions and moments that were not seen in the movie. Whether these scenes were scratched off at the writing stage or was never thought of isn't my issue. I'm here to explore and analyze what is in the movie. So let's continue. His character in the movie starts with his new life in San Francisco in modern day. His normal daily life of working as a valet parker with his best friend Katie. At this very moment in the movie, he is the character the audience are supposed to relate to. The man who is just trying to live their best life in the world. The lens to tell the story through. More on that in the perspective part. One day while on his way to work, Shang-Chi encountered one of the thugs sent by his father to retrieve the necklace his mom gave him. Turns out, it wasn't just one thug. They were accompanied by one of the important people to Wenwu, Razor Fist, a guy who has a machete for an arm. How is he able to fit that blade completely concealed in his arm? I have no clue. Just have to sum it up to fantasy science bullcrap. There is in fact a deleted scene that is supposed to add another layer of conflict in this scene and also to the character of Razor Fist, but since it's a deleted scene, we will filter that out of this analysis and I will come back to it in the deleted scenes chapter. I have already praised the fight in the last video, so I will be quick here. Assisted by Jackie Chan's stunt team, the scene took a continuous panning shot to capture all the actions without cuts, contrasting to the stereotypical Western movie fight scenes that do a multitude of cuts for the safety of the actors and actresses. The ones in Shang-Chi are the type of scenes that are shown in kung fu movies to have a more realistic fight scene, which would require significantly more skill in the actors or the stuntmans. Shang-Chi defeated these assassins and Razor Fist by pulling a stunt with Katie that separates the bus in half, saving the other passengers on the bus as well. Shang-Chi realizes he lost his necklace, decides to immediately pack for Macau, as he knows his father is going after his sister. Now let's pause there for a second to explore that a little bit more. Of course, it is a natural reaction for Shang-Chi to care for his sister after realizing what his father is after, but he has no idea if his father already has his sister's necklace, and there is no perceivable way of him checking it at the moment. If I haven't already mentioned it to you guys, Shang-Chi deliberately abandoned his sister when he ran away from his father. Besides knowing his sister escaped his father on her own, he doesn't know anything else, and he has never checked in on her. These unmentioned past actions show a brother that doesn't actively care about his sister's well-being. Simply hearing about the escape of his sister was enough for him to not bother contacting her. Shang-Chi's action here after the bus fight isn't exactly breaking his character, since he fears the grasp of his father. And now is where the incompetence comes in. Shang-Chi has no way of contacting his sister through the phone, text, or any other internet-based communication. This was the only reason why he and Katie had to take the flight to Macau to warn his sister in person. A smarter character will probably have ways of contacting people they care about, like Mark in Moon Knight, who always has a cell phone to contact his wife. Whether they actually do or not, it is up to the character. When Shang-Chi arrives at Macau, he enters a fight club where he believes his sister is, and was convinced to go into the fight where he just saw a Hulk-like character punch himself out. Now Shang-Chi isn't a normal guy. He is well trained in hand-to-hand combat, but he possesses just about zero superhuman traits, and he has seen enhanced humans fight in the smaller fight cages. I can assure you that any enhanced humans can beat Shang-Chi without an issue. The fact that having a chance of fighting someone who is superhuman does not bother him can only be one out of two possible reasons. One is that Shang-Chi has fought against enhanced humans and he is confident in potentially facing one. This is in fact contradicting to the scene later when Wenwu shows up to stop Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi didn't even try to resist his father because he understands there is no way to defeat his father, someone who has superhuman traits. And now that leaves us with one other possible explanation of why Shang-Chi does not care about potentially facing superhumans. The explanation is that it is something the writers never even thought about. The writers never thought about writing a character to make logical decisions. I know some people don't care about this because the movie is so-called fictional and it is okay for some issues to be ignored. I'm sorry to inform those who actually think like this, that this type of argument encourages the writer to be unimmersive. Unimmersive? Inimmersive? Disimmersive? Well, it encourages the writers to break the immersions created by the character being logical and human. If the type of content you wish to see is illogical and inhuman, I'd ask you to hold that opinion and make your mind open to what I'm saying, as that is antithetical to quality writing and my goal here is to push for better storytelling. I am almost at the mental limit to make a conclusion here, but since this is supposed to be the analysis video, let's explore some more of what they have to offer with Shang-Chi. So far, we have a Shang-Chi who is a murderer, a liar, someone who abandons their family when they need him, and someone who doesn't care to be in extreme danger. Of course, those are oversimplifications. He doesn't have to be that bad of a character, but that is what the writers directly showed us, without the inferences of the audience. During the scaffolding fight scene, Shang-Chi actively resulted in killing some trained assassins who works for his father. And he grabs the last one to ask for information. His sister kicks that guy down, essentially killing the man. Seeing Shang-Chi's reaction, his sister delivers the line,
"Did America make you soft?"
This line is intended to deliver some comedic value to the audience, and it might land successfully for parts of the audience. What this line does not do is being consistent, as Xialing must have seen Shang-Chi knock the other guys off without consideration. America didn't make him soft, and what does soft really even mean here? Is actively involved in the death of some of the guys considered as soft? In fact, what Shang-Chi is doing here is smart, keeping the last man alive for information. So no, he is not soft. There are some serious morality issues here that I will be returning to when I cover Xialing's character. We are going to take a big skip of the plot to the next issue with Shang-Chi's character. After Shang-Chi reaches Ta Lo and unlocks the magic power during the sparring with his auntie, Shang-Chi's character takes a dark turn. He tells Katie that he has actually killed the man who killed his mother, and he wishes to kill his father, the very thing his father trained him to do. One might wonder what happened for his character to turn darker when he is at the place of light, the place where he can be at peace with his past, shown by Auntie. Well, nothing actually happened besides him having a flashback. Yup, he starts to remember his childhood and alter his goal here. Nothing solid warrants the change of character. A more influential approach would be a death of a character, but since it's a Disney movie, we need an alternative approach. So maybe Shang-Chi learns of the brutal conquering of his father in the past. Or maybe it was his father who directly resulted in the death of his mother. The idea is that something more impactful must be revealed to warrant this change in opinion for Shang-Chi. What we did get is only a refresh of something that was already there, and somehow it made changes to Shang-Chi. As generic as it is, I think these evidence are sufficient enough to conclude the inconsistencies in Shang-Chi's character, which I don't think could have been avoided at all due to the character changes needed, while not having the plot to fit those changes.
So when it comes to Shang-Chi, it was a movie, another Marvel movie, honestly. When I watched it back, I actually watched it on opening weekend back on Labor Day last year. And there wasn't too many Marvel movies, so like right off the rip, I actually like really enjoyed it. It was kind of different, right? And it's a like I just said, like it's a Marvel movie, and that's how I kind of categorize it and like evaluated it. I thought it was really good, honestly. I thought it was something different. Maybe that's what it was. I'm not really like familiar specifically with Chinese culture and stuff. I felt like they respected it to a certain point. I don't know. But I did thoroughly enjoy the movie. I thought it was something like a breath of fresh air in a way. Simu Liu, which is, I think he's from like Mississauga or something like that. So I wanted to support him, obviously, since he's a homegrown guy. I know he did Kim's Convenience and stuff like that. And but I don't know. I like the narratives and stuff that they had in it. There were plot holes and stuff. It's like I said, it's a Marvel movie. At some points, it didn't really look like it was in China, to be quite honest with you, and stuff. And like the 10 Rings were pretty cool that I liked with his father. I remember in the movie. I'm sorry, it's been so long since I watched this. Yeah, I mean, I can see why there's negative reviews of it in a way, but I know a lot of people tend to have really liked it. I think like the mass audience liked it. But yeah, no, I just thought it was something different overall. I thought the story was okay and stuff. I'm excited to see what happens next and stuff, with obviously the way it ended with the post-credit scene and everything. And I liked how Simu did as Shang-Chi and stuff. I never read the comics with him, so I never really knew and stuff. But I thought it was a good origin story for him. overall, I don't know. Like I would rewatch it, I guess. Like it's if somebody asked me, but I wouldn't go out of my way to rewatch it. If that's what I'm saying. Like when it came to like Spider-Man: No Way Home, as much as it was a nostalgia train, I love that, and it was fantastic. I would definitely watch that again. So that's how I would kind of compare it. Did think it was better than Eternals and Black Widow from last year's films from Marvel. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings.
Now returning to a secondary protagonist that was briefly mentioned earlier, Xia Ling. Xia Ling is a complicated character conceptually. She is supposed to be a protagonist character that is tied to the progression of the plot. But then there are scenes where she kinda just walks off from plot-related events. Her existence felt extra compared to the rest. Let's start from when we first meet Xia Ling. When Shang-Chi was being trained, Xia Ling also wanted to train, but was not allowed. So she trained secretly. Naturally, she learned less because she did not have a partner to spar with. What? What do you mean that she's better? How is it even possible? Alright, apparently she trained herself to be better. Whatever that's supposed to mean. I won't be complaining about the logistics of how that even happened here, as I have already done that in the Rage video. Xia Ling was then abandoned by her brother, and when she was old enough, aka 16, she escaped all by herself through the underground tunnels. Then she wandered to Macau and established a fight club in the middle of an abandoned skyscraper. A politically charged channel would now tell you that it is bad because a quote-unquote woman needs no man to be successful. Now that is not what I'm here for, and I'm sure you guys get enough of those from other channels. There are some issues in terms of execution of events involved here, like how did she escape or how did she manage to establish the fight club, but ultimately they are minuscule to the character. Essentially, we have an unloved child who was also abandoned by her brother, resulting in her bitterness when she sees Shang-Chi again. So far, that is reasonable and consistent. Her hate for her father and brother drove her down the road of not caring about taking lives. She is supposed to be ruthless, and what the writers have paved here is an anti-villain, but sadly they don't stick with this. Her sense of morality is completely removed when she encounters the men who work for her father, which is coherent with what is inferred from her past events. Her character experiences a sudden change of heart to be on the side of Shang-Chi and turns good when she is in Ta Lo, because she connects with Auntie, and she even earns the respect of the Protector Dragon in the final fight. During the runtime of the movie itself, we sort of have a redemption of the character, just for all of that to be flipped in the post-credit scene, where we see her establishing a new Ten Rings order, now training females to be assassins as well. To be fair, we don't know if this is actually malicious, but what we do know is that she is now in control of a newly established assassin's army. After telling Shang-Chi she is going to dismantle the organization. This means Xia Ling isn't altruistic, she isn't exactly trying to do good, and we don't know if she is doing evil. We see all of these changes throughout the movie, but with nothing to warrant the changes in her character. We get about one moment to show where she might have forgiven Shang-Chi, and it is when Shang-Chi was holding Xia Ling when they were fighting the Dweller in Darkness. As far as the character relation goes between Xia Ling and Shang-Chi, at this time of the movie, we assume that she has already forgiven him for what he did. So this scene of never letting go just kinda came out of nowhere. There exists a deleted scene that would make this more impactful to the audience, but once again, it is a deleted scene, so I will be revisiting it later when it is time. One detail that usually goes by unnoticed is that the director and the writer try to give more depth to her character with all of these posters in the back of Xia Ling's room. First of all, we don't exactly know if this is actually Xia Ling's room or not. It was never explicitly shown until the post-credit scene. Next is a translation of these posters. All of them are most likely posters for bands and movies that were originally in English and being directly translated to Chinese. Here we have multiple posters that says Lobotomy. I think it is a heavy metal band. And since heavy metal isn't exactly big in China, these posters are very confusing to look at. If these foreign posters were in English, or its original language and not translated to Chinese, they would have been more expressive of Xiaoling's character, just like the intention of the director and writer. Having the posters translated to Chinese would imply the concerts and stuff happened in China, which is not the case, as it is falsely representing the demographics. This example is yet another thing that directors chose to do that went to waste. And it goes to the big category of having the movie bilingual. But what they portrayed is a character that seems almost extra to the movie. She kinda just exists in the background. I think with a character like this, we can conclude that the writers and directors don't excel at doing character works, especially when they made the decision to make an integral character to the plot into a minor character. Nonetheless, we should continue to examine the rest of the characters. The other and most unnecessary secondary protagonist is Katie. She is played by Awkwafina, and yeah, that's actually her stage name. Awkwafina, or Laura Lum, figuratively plays herself in this movie. Well, it is more of what the public perceives her to be, as we can't know what she is like privately. I'm sure she's not as lousy and as annoying IRL. But from what we have, it doesn't seem like the writers thought much about this character and just told Awkwafina to do the usual when filming, which is ultimately fine. Her character is mostly used for comic relief, and the character also carries the perspective of the audience from the later half of the movie. We are told by her friend Sue that she is a smart person, but her actions reveal the polar opposite. This is one of the first things people learn not to do when writing a story. You have a sideline character telling the character who they are rather than showing who they are. This problem exists all over modern movies, and it is a sad sight to see. I understand that the concept of show don't tell is old and many people don't like it when it is mentioned. But the direct opposite, being tell don't show, is a big no in writing. This is abnormal. Person A telling person B how great person B is abnormal. It doesn't happen in day-to-day conversations. One of the only incidents when that would actually happen is when a person is down and these quote-unquote praises are actually false, to make the other person feel better. This reminds me of a certain other MCU movie.
You are Carol Danvers. You were the woman on that black box risking her life to do the right thing. My best friend, who supported me as a mother and a pilot when no one else did. You were smart and funny and a huge pain in the ass.
Because there is such a lack of character in Katie, the writers decided to force in some so-called arcs for the payoffs later. The car one kinda makes sense, albeit ignoring the many plot conveniences that needed to occur for the payoff to happen. More people take issue with her other arc, the one with the bow. Anyone with any experience in archery would be able to tell you about the likelihood of someone who had one day of practice like her to hit the final crucial shot. The muscle group required to shoot a bow is nowhere related to any of the mainstream exercising activities. There would be a near zero chance of her even able to pull the bow back, and certainly not being able to shoot an arrow that far. But let's give it some leeway of the special material dragon scale involved. Let's say she was physically able to make the shot because of the magic materials. I'm sure somehow the people of Ta Lo made a dragon scale string easier to be pulled. If you're not familiar with movie criticisms, this type of character who is just naturally good at things is usually called a Mary Sue. But honestly, I don't think Katie is one. She doesn't even have enough character to properly make that conclusion. With the amount of screen time we have with Katie, it is very hard to conclude that she even had a character. Most of the time, she is just there, standing, and you're not even supposed to question why, she just is. I have a more simple phrase from the TV show Loki that unironically describes Katie's role very well.
You're a flea on the back of a dragon. In for one hell of a ride, but you did manage to hang on.
Most people don't mind Katie's trait of being good at driving. Well, it's not really a trait, it's more of a skill, but whatever. Which isn't exactly an issue, but here is what the director and writer has to say about it.
We keep trying to break as many stereotypes as possible in this movie, one of which is like Asian females. There's sometimes a stereotype that they're not good drivers. So in our movie, Nora's character Katie is the best driver in San Francisco. So one by one, we're breaking those stereotypes.
Yeah, she might be the best driver in the world, honestly.
Yes, probably.
I am sorry. What? This stereotype you tried to break is definitely not broken. You have chosen to make one person really good at driving while also putting in two characters from the same ethnicity who are of the stereotype. Both Katie's brother and her friend Sue were mentioned as bad at driving. Actually, both were connected to parallel parking. You have reinforced the stereotype, not breaking it. Katie is somehow considered as the best driver in the world when she dangerously drifts around the city and traverses a tight forest that is shown to be able to be flattened by cars. I don't know what their definition of being good at driving is, but it is different for everyone. For me personally, being a good driver means being a safe driver, one that does not put the passenger nor other people on the road in danger. That is clearly not what she was doing on the road. Sure, she probably felt safe to do those maneuvers on the road because she knows how to drift, but no matter what part of the world you live in, this is definitely considered as dangerous or careless driving, because you are not thinking about the other people on the road, which is actually illegal in most countries in the world. Good job, you stereotype breakers. Break the stereotype by having the character break the law. Perfect. If I haven't been clear with this to you, let me say it out loud. Katie has no meaningful character and was assigned with arcs that ultimately means nothing, and yet she was a crucial part of defeating the ultimate evil of the story. What a great character. If you think that is it about the characters, I'll sadly inform you that it is not. There is not a single functioning character in this movie. While I don't want to explore the minor original characters, there is one left that is worth mentioning. Trevor Slattery is a returning character that was inserted into the story as a connection piece to the MCU, as the audience would realize who he is if they have watched the Iron Man trilogy, as well as the Marvel one-shot named All Hail the King. This is a common phenomenon in many MCU movies and other movie franchises, having features of other characters in the same universe as Easter eggs. The purpose is to give the audience an "oh hey, remember him?" moment. The same thing was done to this dude on the bus who filmed the fight between Shang-Chi and the thugs. If you didn't notice, he was featured in Homecoming as well, except that Homecoming took place on the East Coast and Shang-Chi lives on the West Coast. And now we just have a character that is randomly on a bus across the country. How did he get here and why? Don't question it. Why was he the one to perform a critical action to the plot that resulted in the world knowing Shang-Chi? Don't question it. Anyways, back to Trevor. His character is comic relief, as he was in Iron Man 3. So for half the movie, we have two characters fulfilling the same need. When Trevor is introduced into the movie, Katie starts to get less comedic scene, leaving her character even more empty than it should have. For anyone who has watched the one-shot All Hail the King, an interesting character development took place, and Trevor even says it himself.
Au contraire, Dave, when an actor has inhabited a role as long as I have, he often becomes it. And it him.
This thought was completely removed when we see Trevor in Shang-Chi. A wasted chance? Probably. I don't expect much of continuity in the MCU movies these days. Trevor does indeed have another role besides comic relief. Combined with the mythical beast Morris, they are a MacGuffin, an object or character that results in the progression of the plot and while lacking intrinsic importance, aka a convenient plot device. They are the only thing on Earth that can possibly allow Shang-Chi and others to get to where they need to go, and they are just suddenly there when they are needed. Usually the usage of a MacGuffin is considered as bad or lazy, but not all plot devices are bad. They can be good if enough information is established, like the One Ring in The Lord of the Rings. Although the ring itself seems to be pretty convenient to show up at the Shire when the story needed it to be, there is a whole prequel of how the ring got to the Shire, called The Hobbit. The difference between the ring and the Trevor Morris combo is that the ring was established from the beginning of the movie to be the object to progress the plot, and the importance is established in the prologue of The Lord of the Rings, and every character acknowledges the ring. Now, if you ever encounter this post by Screen Rant, in which they have listed the ring as a MacGuffin, please do not cite them as a credible source. They do not know the difference between a plot device and a MacGuffin. The ring has an intrinsic importance, therefore not a MacGuffin. What is worse in this case in Shang-Chi is that the Trevor Morris combo, the MacGuffin, wasn't even sought after by the protagonists. They just conveniently popped up and ready to go. There are many things that could have been done to avoid such lazy writing, but I am not here to provide solutions. If I were to provide solutions, I don't think my entire lifespan would be long enough to do so. There are many other minor characters who are just kinda there. This includes Razor Fist, Death Dealer, Yingnan, and Guangbo. There is not really much to mention about their characters, and since they are so minor, I will be returning to some of the missed character moments in the deleted scenes chapter. I sparsely mentioned the plot of the movie in the character part, so let's organize those and lay out my criticisms here. I am going to organize them in a chronological order to show you how ridiculous the events are. Also, to save some time, I will not be explicitly pointing out all the plot issues like I did in the part 1 video. If you wish for that, I recommend you checking out that video after. But I will cover the parts that I didn't point out in the other video here. There are lots of inferred events besides the one that actually happened to result what the plot turned out to be. I will use a different accent when describing an inferred event to make them stand out. The point of this section is to lay out the plot so plainly that anyone can point out the issues. So let's get started. Long ago, in another universe far away, we have Ta Lo, a planet that is far more advanced than any in modern day MCU. The inhabitants of the planet had a battle with the soul-sucking demon called the Dweller in Darkness. With the help of the Protector Dragon, the people of Ta Lo sealed the demon behind the gate. They then established an organization to stage a bunch of so-called warriors to defend the gate. Because these warriors are so excellent, they did not need to place a more advanced defense system there, just in case the demon is able to escape. At some random time after the events of the Dweller in Darkness, a multi-dimensional portal to Earth was formed. The Dweller in Darkness started to attract visitors from another universe by promising them what they desire. The people of Ta Lo constructed a shifting bamboo forest on the earth side of the portal that allegedly eats people, to try to limit the amount of visitors. But not before the legend of Ta Lo was spread to China, which was later recorded in some books. Setting the story of Ta Lo aside for a tiny bit, we have the birth of Xu Wenwu. In around the year 1100 CE, sometimes in his life, he found the legendary rings, either from a tomb or from a volcano. Wenwu used the power of the rings to start conquering the world. We see successes of him defeating some supposedly Muslim army and some other armies. Deciding that the overworld is too dangerous for an organization started by an immortal man, Wenwu decides to take his army underground to conquer more. In terms of why and how he managed to do that, we have no clues at all. And I'm not even going to attempt to explain for the movie. After conquering the world, and yes, the world, so this includes control in Wakanda, S.H.I.E.L.D., the Soviets, and any other authorities you can think of. By the year 1996, Wenwu discovered that the legend about the mythical Ta Lo are real. How? Don't know. He heads into the moving forest and quickly becomes the only survivor due to the dangerous nature of the moving forest. Wenwu wanders the forest and meets Ying Li, the future mother of Shang-Chi. They fight and they fall in love. Ying Li decides to abandon her home to be with Wenwu, since the people from the village would not let Wenwu stay there. Ying Li knew she would have multiple children, so she herself constructed a magical wooden dragon wall sculpture that shows a supposed map of the way to Ta Lo, and she used the activation items of the map to make 2 necklaces to give to the children. Ying Li deliberately avoided telling Wenwu about this, but she decided to write them down in her notes somewhere. On top of that, sometimes after the kids were born, Ying Li traveled to Ta Lo without Wenwu and the kids to meet with her sister Yingnan, while specifically telling her sister to prepare something for the kids when they get to Ta Lo, implying that she is never going to take the kids back here herself. One can say she predicted her own death. Unfortunately, the life of happiness doesn't last that long. After about 8 years of laying down the rings, Wenwu's past life caught up to him, a rival gang of Wenwu. Apparently, Wenwu is a gangster now. They showed up and just demanded payment for killing their leader's family, but Wenwu isn't home, so they settled for just killing the wife of Wenwu. Let's pause here for a tiny second. I have sufficient reasons to say why these people are not Chinese. So, one of the most famous idioms in Chinese that everyone learns is called 斩草除根, literally translating to if you desire to kill the weed, you need to exterminate the roots. This saying is also commonly applied to eliminating a rival or an enemy. If you want to avoid further bloodshed, you have to kill the children of your rivals and enemies. Not only did the rival gang not kill the children, they didn't even bother killing the man they are here to kill. The leader clearly just paved the way for himself to be killed. Let's continue the plot, because technically the last criticism belonged in the character category, but it is far better presented here. Wenwu realizes putting down his rings to grow old with his wife was a mistake, so he puts them back on, and also takes his son to experience the brutality of the world he lives in. He killed a bunch of men in front of his son, in retaliation of the murder of his wife. Wenwu decides to stop hunting for the man and train up Shang-Chi to do it. Shang-Chi began the harsh combat training when he was around the age of 8, and by the time he was 14, he learned every possible way to kill a person, and he was ready to go on his first assignment, to kill the man who murdered his mother. Shang-Chi killed the man, but he was so scared of what he had become, he ran away to America, to San Francisco, abandoning his sister at the same time, despite knowing that she does not want to be there at their father's place. Shang-Chi hopped on a shipping crate and arrived in the US and successfully applied for refugee status. With the help of a nice family, Shang-Chi had a new life. Over the coming years in San Francisco, Shang-Chi buried this part of his memory so deep, he never wanted to open up to anyone about them. Shang-Chi met his best friend and potential love interest Katie in high school, and works with her in modern day as valet parkers. One day near Qingming Festival, one of the 4 festivals that the Chinese people memorialize their dead family and ancestors. While Shang-Chi and Katie are on a bus on their way to work, they encounter some thugs asking for the necklace. One of the thugs has a machete for a forearm, and they fight Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi outsmarted his opponents by using the environment to separate the bus in half, therefore escaping from the thugs. Shang-Chi realizes he lost the necklace during the process, and he thinks those men were sent by his father. Worrying that his father will get his hands on the other necklace owned by his sister, Shang-Chi flies to Macau towards an address on a postcard that he assumed his sister sent. Being extremely confused about what happened on the bus, Katie decides to go with Shang-Chi and tells him that he can explain on the plane. On the plane, Shang-Chi explains to Katie of his past, of the training, and what happened in his first assignment. He told Katie that he couldn't go through with it and ran away. After arriving at Macau, they locate the address on a postcard and heads up an industrial elevator. Shang-Chi signs some random paper on the elevator, and then they enter a fight club, with all kinds of people fighting in many tiny cells. And in the big ring, Abomination and Wong are fighting. How did they both get here? No clue, and stop asking questions. Shang-Chi and Katie meets a character called Zhang, and he promises Shang-Chi he will help to find his sister after Shang-Chi participates in the fight in the ring. Shang-Chi realizes the danger that can happen, but nothing can stop him from ensuring the safety of his sister. Shang-Chi reluctantly does after being quickly convinced by Katie, and enters the ring. Turns out his opponent is the person he is looking for, his sister. Shang-Chi does not want to fight, but his sister wants to, therefore resulting in the defeat and the total knockout of Shang-Chi. During the fight, we do get a quick flashback before Shang-Chi left for his first assignment. He told his sister he will be back in 3 days. We immediately get the payoff of that scene within 2 minutes of showing the scene. When the setup and payoff are so close to each other, it generates repetitive material. The technique is often one the general audience don't realize, but when they do pick it up, often the phrase of, "Hey, that was from earlier," could be used. The common usage of setups and payoffs are in comedy, but that is not the limit of the technique. Like the husky in the opening scene of The Thing, and the importance of the unicorn origami to Deckard in Blade Runner. Both of those are pretty good examples of the usage of setup and payoff outside of comedy. If you don't know what those examples are, go and watch those movies. They are a lot better than Shang-Chi. The running husky would be confusing for the people during the first watch, but when viewing a second time, they would know what the Norwegian man was saying even without being able to understand the language. In this case, the husky scene is a setup and the whole movie is a payoff. In Blade Runner, they vaguely showed the importance of unicorns to Deckard alone, and Ridley Scott made sure that he had enough screen time for the unicorn origami for the audiences to pick up the clues of the twisting truth. The reason why this example here in Shang-Chi qualifies for setup and payoff is because of the repetition of information, as the audience is told twice of what Shang-Chi said to his sister. The second time of mentioning it is more towards telling Katie, but since the audience already knows that, aka noticed the setup, therefore hearing it again would be a payoff. The writers could have gone entirely without showing it in a flashback, and no context will be changed here since about a near zero emotional experience is provided with this payoff. For it to be more influential in terms of emotion or plot, the setup should be moved forward and maybe had a chance to show in the plane scene. Or they can just completely take out the dialogue in the flashback scene. Before I forget, Katie walks into the office with money and Shang-Chi asks,
"Did you bet against me?"
This is a character moment played off for comedy. Most people can just laugh it off and not really care about what this means. But this scene damages Katie's character more than the comedic value given. If you take the lens of Disney out of the picture and replace it with the lens of logic, Shang-Chi is not a superhuman. He did train to kill people, but after seeing Abomination, a superhuman, Shang-Chi would not be willing to participate, no matter how good he is. He should know that pure strength can overcome his mastery. Going into the ring without knowing his opponent would be extremely dangerous. Going back to Katie, she is someone who asks Shang-Chi to put himself in extreme danger. She then also bet on him to lose, and she knows that there is a chance that Shang-Chi can be brutally or even fatally wounded. This destroys Katie as a character, as this flips even the basic character traits she has, which is wanting to keep the ones she cares about safe. The comedic value took away possible character traits and establishment. And it is why Katie's character is extremely empty throughout the movie. Back to the plot. Before Shang-Chi can start reconnecting with his sister, their father Wenwu soldiers start to show up. Xialing quickly enters her secret elevator with Zhang Zhang and therefore abandoning her brother, as payback for what he did. Realizing the danger, Shang-Chi breaks the window and jumps onto the scaffolding with Katie, but the soldier assassins quickly catch up to them. Shang-Chi beats up and essentially kills multiple soldier assassins, and he fails to save Katie, but she is saved by Xialing. Another right-hand man, a Wenwu Death Dealer, or the guy with the cool mask, shows up and grabs Xialing's necklace. Shang-Chi runs after Death Dealer and catches up to him right before he has the chance to escape, resulting in a pretty well choreographed fight scene. Shang-Chi overpowers Death Dealer and decides to kill him, but is stopped after the arrival of his father. Wenwu tells Shang-Chi that he misses him and he wants Shang-Chi to go home. Shang-Chi reluctantly agrees because he knows that he cannot defeat his father, so he does know his limits. I wonder what made him want to go into that ring earlier. I guess I should shut up and consume. The whole family and Katie arrives at Wenwu's mountain compound in the helicopter. A helicopter and a moving forest. Well, I better shut up again and consume. Wenwu announces the return of his son and he tells Razor Fist to take the girls to their room. The girls have a chat in their sleeping quarters. Shang-Chi wanders around the compound and goes to the place where he used to train, and he puts his fist at the column he used to punch. Shang-Chi then gets a flashback of when he was young and was training, showing that his father is or was a pretty good person. Cutting back to present time, everyone is at the dinner table. Wenwu starts to talk about the significance of names, so he naturally starts to address the Mandarin from the Iron Man movies, essentially turning it into a joke. What a way to treat legacy plots. One of the ways for them to say, "Oh look, how silly these past movies were." This is a viable way to jokingly bring in an Easter egg, as well as finishing a legacy plot. And generally, this helps the integration of the new movies into the universe that the old ones created. But this one is different. This one almost insults the past movies. However, this isn't the worst Marvel has done. In their TV series Loki, the scene where he opens a drawer and it was full of Infinity Stones is decisively more insulting, turning the past 10 years of build-up of events in the MCU into jokes. If one were to watch Loki as their first MCU content, there would be absolutely zero investment for them if they decide to go back and watch the older movies. Comparatively, the same concept was achieved way better in the scene where Cap fights his younger self in Endgame, when his younger self tells him,
"I can do this all day."
This is a callback to what Cap stood for, persistence. But of course Cap knows it himself. His reaction turned to a lighthearted joke.
Yeah, I know.
In case you're wondering what the difference is, well, he didn't say something along the lines of, "Wow, I really used to say that? What a joke." In this case, the joke Wenwu decides to make essentially renders the name Mandarin useless, and he never cared about it, which directly goes in contrast with the one-shot All Hail the King.
You took his name, and now he wants it back.
Shang-Chi isn't exactly what I would call high art. It isn't even something I would consider Marvel. It's Marvel in the same way the Fantastic Four movies are Marvel, because it seems completely unaware that it's been made after the franchise is more than 10 years on. It tries to be mysterious in the way Thor was, presenting an unknown world completely hidden from the average person, but doesn't have anything to offer. You see, Shang-Chi presents nothing in the way of mythology, despite having a rich lore to pull from. Instead of setting Ta Lao on floating islands, something unique to the MCU, it's just kind of a fishing village, But hey, when you have CGI, you can make the desert hellhole known as Australia look like some Chinese fishing village. It also has the same problems early Marvel movies have. The hero and the villain are the exact same person, but one is evil and one is good. It isn't like Iron Man, where Ironmonger is larger and therefore stronger, while Iron Man is sleeker and more refined, exploiting weaknesses in Ironmonger's design. There is simply an evil dragon and a good dragon, an evil Mandarin and a good Mandarin. Not that he's called Mandarin anymore, but you get the point. When I came out of the theater, I thought, it's alright. But it became obvious to me in the subsequent hours that it was just unoffensive, plain bad, unless you're Guai. For me, Shang-Chi doesn't represent the end of Marvel, or a new start to another saga ripped from the comics. It represents a factory line. I didn't like this one, so I'll wait for the next. Only, no, I don't think I will.
Moving along the plot, Wenwu brings up the topic of his wife, Ying Li, that she left the family away back to Ta Lo. He then takes everyone into his study and reveals that he has been hearing voices from his dead wife and she is trapped behind a door in Ta Lo. Wenwu takes out the 2 necklaces and takes the children to the wooden dragon sculpture, and then some magic water reveals a safe pathway into Ta Lo. And he says this pathway opens once every year during Qingmingjie. There is a cultural issue here, which is why would it open on a day that is connected to dead people? Ta Lo isn't a place for the dead, is it? Wenwu tells his children that if the people of Ta Lo won't let him through, he is going to burn it down. Upon hearing this, Shang-Chi tries to resist, and they were taken down by his father and imprisoned behind some door. They follow some weird sound from the tunnel and find Trevor, the guy from the Iron Man movies that quote-unquote impersonated Wenwu. They pulled some jokes here and there and introduced Morris, a mythical beast from Ta Lo. Conveniently, the combo of these two are the exact thing Shang-Chi, Xialing, and Katie need to reach Ta Lo before Wenwu does. Then Xialing kicks the wall down, allowing for all of them to actually escape, telling the rest that this was the same tunnel she escaped last time. I have never seen writing more lazy than this. If you are thinking about writing a story, don't, do not, and do not ever do this. The amount of contrivance packed within these 2 scenes is absolutely unacceptable. Things that need to happen just happen because they are needed. There is no struggle nor frustration. The protagonists are just given exactly what they need for the progression of the plot, because the story needs them to move on. This issue does not only plague Shang-Chi, but is prominent in many modern movies, especially in recent Disney Marvel movies. So that does exclude No Way Home, even though it has issues as well. This is also part of the reason why I'm creating this video as a series, to explore the true natures of post-COVID cinema, as well as potentially providing some failures of the past that the future writers can learn from. Shang-Chi and companions escape his father's compound after stealing an EV. I'm not going to complain how they got enough range to drive there, but since we don't know how far between the 2 places are, we don't know how much time has passed. It just seems like they teleported from Wenwu's mountain compound to the forest. That said, it is the same thing they did at the beginning of the movie. This is a very common thing to do in recent cinema. Cut down the time it takes to travel to shorten the showtime. It isn't necessarily bad in terms of storytelling, but when you do show the process of traveling, which doesn't have to take long at all, the world feels more immersive, that they are actually living in the world. A classic example is in fact The Lord of the Rings. We barely see any forms of teleportation in that movie. When people go to places, you actually see them go. What is strange is that they do show characters traveling when Shang-Chi and Katie travel to Macau. Why didn't they bother to show the traveling process from the mountain compound to the forest? No clue. And now it seems like the forest is geographically close to the compound. They then pull a string of jokes. Whether they actually entertain you is up to you. They certainly didn't work for me. The protagonists head into the forest, and with Katie's incredible car skills established earlier in the movie, the group successfully makes it to the location of the portal beyond a waterfall, and they enter Ta Lo. After they exit on the other side of the tunnel, they start to see a bunch of mythical creatures. Oh, sorry, mythological creatures. And these do of course actually exist in Chinese mythology. More on that later. The Fellowship drives to a town and sees the people of Ta Lo, looking very hostile. Shang-Chi exits the car and starts to explain their arrival, which Guangbo did not believe and told them to go away. The Ta Lo fishing villagers remained hostile until a woman, Ying Nan, tells the men to stand down, and tells the companionship that she is Shang-Chi's auntie. Shang-Chi explains the situation to Ying Nan, and she tells Shang-Chi and the bundle of associates the history of their world and the soul-sucking demon dragon called the Dweller in Darkness, distinctly describing their world as its own universe. I will be returning to this topic in the next section where I talk about the settings and the world building. The friendly partnership of Shang-Chi starts to train. Everyone gets new weapons or new abilities. Shang-Chi gets the wind magic. Katie learns how to shoot a bow. And Xialing gets some weapons that she is familiar with. At the same time, Wenwu is in his office. And this time, not only did he hear his wife, he started seeing her. This scene serves as a final straw to solidify his motivations and intentions to bring his wife back. There are honestly pretty good elements in this movie, but they are so scattered across the whole thing, they ultimately amount to nothing. I would like to appreciate the performance of Tony Leung in this scene as he acts with his eyes. You can feel and sympathize with his emotions purely from what he is doing with his eyes. You are a legend, Tony Leung, and also the person who carried this movie. Razor Fist then arrives and informs Wenwu that the men are ready, and they will be leaving at dawn. Going back to Shang-Chi, he is sitting by the lake, thinking about his childhood, remembering the day his mother died, when the rival gang of Wenwu breaks into his compound and kills her and her only. Shang-Chi remembers how he just watched his mom die, not being able to help. Well, it is kinda explainable since he was only 8 years old, but not to Wenwu, as we see later. Wenwu returns home with some bags, but he sees his wife dead. He speaks with Shang-Chi and puts his rings back on. Wenwu takes his son to find the man who killed his wife, letting Shang-Chi witness violence for the first time, and learns a lesson from his father. Being a blood debt must be paid by blood. Fast forward, we get a scene where Shang-Chi finishes training and leaves for the first assignment. Flashback over, Katie sits down beside Shang-Chi. He tells Katie that he lied, and that he actually killed the man who killed his mother, and now he is going to kill his father. There is honestly not much else to the complexity of the plot from now on, so I am going to skip the rest of the plot. If you are in fact looking for a detailed commentary of a scene-by-scene breakdown, my first Shang-Chi video already did that, so check it out. When writing something that is a part of an existing universe like the MCU, especially when they are the works of other people, it is important to make sure that you don't break some of the established rules. Otherwise, the readers would be confused, and if it is performed badly, fans would also be infuriated. I think you all know what example I'm going to bring up, but here they are anyways. In the infamous Star Wars The Last Jedi, director Rian Johnson and team decided to pull a maneuver that flipped the entire understanding of the usage of hyperspace travel and space warfare. And yes, I am referring to the so-called Holdo maneuver named by J.J. Abrams in the later movie, where Admiral Holdo launched the ship into hyperspace, directly facing the enemy fleet, resulting in the total destruction of the First Order fleet, including the biggest ship ever created in the Star Wars universe. This directly contrasts with one of the first rules ever established with hyperspace in A New Hope, as well as potentially shifting all future space combat. This happened because of the negligence of the writers to respect rules established by past contributors. Good job, Ryan. The combined result of the movie was reflected on the box office of the following Star Wars movie, On Solo: A Star Wars Story, being the first flop of Star Wars ever. The other example that I intend to bring in is Game of Thrones Season 8, but I don't think I have remotely enough time in this video to explore that. However, I will leave a link to a channel called Supercut Delight, as he has many videos exploring Game of Thrones on his channel. The point of mentioning these is to show you guys the consequences of the establishment of retroactive continuity, or more commonly known as retcon. Returning to Shang-Chi, they never established outrageous ones like the ones in The Last Jedi, but there are still quite a few in this movie. This includes the minor changes they made with Bruce Banner reverting the look he had in Endgame, and also their treatment of the Mandarin name from the Iron Man movies. Those establishments are not as important as what I'm about to bring up. If you felt that this movie feels weird in terms of its ability to fit into the MCU, you are completely right. The previous writers certainly did not take into account of the existence of Ta Lo when they made the movies beforehand. And yes, I am implying that the entire movie is a retcon of MCU. Let's dig into the world building of the movie before I explain why. First to come is the establishment of yet another underground special agency, the Ten Rings Army. Established by Wenwu sometime after the 12th century, and from what they told us in the movie, they have been controlling and manipulating historical events in the background. Now, if you are in fact up to date with the MCU movies, the MCU now has the Eternals overwatching humanity, the Ten Rings Army conquering the world underground, the Black Widows manipulating events, and the Winter Soldier program doing the exact same thing. On top of that, the whole nation of Wakanda is most likely keeping an eye on the events of the world. When the MCU unfolded the Winter Soldier program, I was a bit skeptical, but I was okay with it knowing that the most secretive assassins was assigned to alter the events of history. After Black Widow, there are still possible ways to explain how these secret organizations never encountered each other. Now, knowing that there is an even older organization, it gets really hard to believe that. When the movie tells us when Wenwu had nowhere left to conquer, he turned his eyes to Ta Lo. In the normal context, this should mean that Wenwu has people controlling everywhere in the world, including Hydra in the past, S.H.I.E.L.D. and now S.W.O.R.D., Wakanda, and the Red Room. Based on what Wenwu has, it is very hard to believe that his army has the capacity to control all of those.
Yeah, it was an idea early on as we were developing this incarnation of the story for Shang-Chi, that Ten Rings has a history going back to the very beginnings of the MCU.
The fact that they tried to establish a connection between this Ten Rings to the Ten Rings at the beginning of Iron Man 1 is absolutely ridiculous, because Tony Stark would not let such an organization exist, or at the least he would look into it. The Ten Rings organization in Iron Man was clearly not the same one, as that one was controlled by this man called Aldrich Killian, who actually appropriated the name because the Ten Rings in Iron Man 1 doesn't sound like they work for Killian. If this organization did exist through all this time in the MCU, and is in fact the one who captured Tony Stark, they would have been taken down just like Hydra and the Red Room. Besides the Ten Rings, the existence of Ta Lo and the Dweller in Darkness are also problematic for being inside of the MCU. So far from what Auntie Ying Nan told us, Ta Lo is a planet that exists in a parallel universe. Not only is this not possible due to the existence of Kang from the Loki TV series, the fact that this never had an impact on the MCU is simply impossible. First, let's tackle the Loki claim. In the TV show Loki, it is established that the MCU history has been scripted, and there is in fact one and only one timeline of events. It is very hard to explain without a visual context, so here we go. Logically speaking, all universes have some part of shared root history, and due to Kang's control, all of those branches are gone and only one exists. And if you tell me that, oh, Sylvie released the multiverse, I can tell you that is completely false, since the multiverse will produce endless amounts of Kang again, and as we see, the TVA still exists after Sylvie killed the one sitting at the desk. The TVA were still talking about pruning timelines, which means there is still only one timeline. To be completely fair, that is Loki and their retcon issues. So what if we take Loki out of the continuity and assume that the multiverse always existed, like from what they told us in Doctor Strange? Okay, now this makes sense, that Ta Lo can be a planet from a completely different universe. Also coming from Auntie, we know that Ta Lo has civilization that surpasses any in the MCU. The civilizations of the MCU has some really incredible technologies displayed in many of the MCU movies, like the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, Captain Marvel, and even Black Panther. To tell me that Ta Lo is a world with technology that surpasses any in the MCU would be either a misstatement from the writing team or some extremely bold claims. If indeed it wasn't a mistake to say the word universe, this would have some serious issues. No one in this world would be convinced that the planet has the utmostly advanced technology, and they only employ people to fight the ultimate evil that almost wiped out the universe with enhanced sticks. I don't intend to continue the criticisms based on a single word, so let's continue. We as the audience learned from Auntie that the Dweller in Darkness whispers to people in a different universe that are powerful enough to free it. If you place Wenwu on a power scale, there are billions of creatures that possess more powerful abilities than Wenwu. Thor, Vision, Captain Marvel, Thanos, you get the point. If the Dweller in Darkness does in fact have the ability to choose to speak to whoever they want to, which it evidently does, choosing Wenwu seems like a grave mistake. The issues in the world building ends about there. Besides these, there are also a bunch of contrivances or convenient settings, including the date of the passage opens being right around the corner of the day set it in the movie. I had some trouble fitting this section into the flow of the video, so I guess I will just explore it here, just a little bit after I mention the power scale, and right before we get into the conflicts in this movie. If you have had the opportunity to watch one of the best made Kung Fu action comedy films, Stephen Chow's Kung Fu Hustle, you would know that setting a solid scale of power is important. This way, the audience can identify the stakes easily. The Axe Gang thugs are more powerful than the villagers, but these Kung Fu masters are more powerful than the thugs. These blind assassins are far more powerful than the Kung Fu masters. The owners of the village have abilities far beyond the blind assassins, but even they are no match for this old man. In the end, the old man is defeated by an awakened Kung Fu genius, played by Stephen Chow himself. Behind all of these simplifications, Stephen Chow's character goes through a journey which let him and the audience witness the clear difference in the power levels. So when the characters eventually confront the old man, the audience is invested in the character enough to hope that they get out of this alive. Drawing back to Shang-Chi, the power scale in this movie is one of the biggest puddles of mud in the world. In short, Wenwu was defeated by Ying Li, who presumably only possesses the power of the dragon, which is the wind power, implying that everyone with this power is able to defeat Wenwu, and multiple people possess such power. When Wenwu enters Ta Lo later, he should be extremely afraid of everyone, as anyone can have that power. Shang-Chi knows he can't defeat his father, so he seeks the wind power, which Ying Nan teaches him, but he is still weaker than the auntie, shows that he is no genius. Shang-Chi then decides to not use the powers when he first encountered his dad during Act 3, despite knowing that it is the only thing that can defeat his father, just for him to pull that power out later to defeat his dad. Oh, don't worry, it is not just your head that's spinning. My head is also spinning when I try to organize this paragraph. When the power scale situation is grasped, the stakes of the movie fall straight apart, because nothing makes sense. No one is making logical decisions. On top of that, if the Dweller in Darkness knows the true powers of the ring, why would it ever choose the bearer to come? It would know that the rings will have the powers to kill it besides freeing it. So it is not a smart move at all. I don't know if I have a direct analogy for this situation, but it is ridiculous to think that some creatures like the Dweller in Darkness, as powerful as it is, would make such stupid decision. When characters think outside of their logical mind, it makes the characters even flatter than they were. And it takes what is left of the investment from the audience right out of the equation, because they can no longer identify the stakes of the movie. When nothing is at risk, no one cares. If I haven't already bored you to death, I would like to explore some literary devices. And in this section, the conflict. Most of you probably only have vague memories of this during high school English class. In truth, it is more important than you probably remember. A conflict is what drives the story forward. For example, what drives the main character to do what they do in the plot? Was it because of something they want? Or was it because of someone? A well-rounded story probably has a few more conflicts that drive the story forward. Let's take the example of the Frodo plotline from The Lord of the Rings. What drives Frodo forward? The ring. The world will only be saved from Sauron if he destroys the ring. Therefore, character versus character. At the same time, the ring corrupts the bearer and brings in another conflict, character versus self. Concurrently, this generates many other conflicts. Frodo and Gollum, Frodo and Sam, Frodo and Boromir, as well as Faramir, Frodo and the orcs, and so on. A well-rounded story has an umbrella of conflicts, all of them under the major one in the plot. In other words, Frodo encounters difficulties along the way of his main goal of destroying the ring. Now let's dive into the conflicts in Shang-Chi. Well, it's kinda hard to start. If you use Shang-Chi as the main character, the main conflict is most likely character versus character, Shang-Chi versus Wenwu. It is what drives Shang-Chi to go to his sister in Macau. It is also what drives him to go to Ta Lo. But it ends about there. The third act finishes off the conflict between Shang-Chi and Wenwu by bringing in a whole different entity, therefore a whole different conflict. One that might tilt onto the supernatural scale. This entity was not introduced until the third act and barely hinted at in the early parts of the movie, making the impact of our supposed protagonist defeating it ever so slightly uninteresting and anticlimactic. Comparatively, let's take one of the strongest Marvel entries, the Avengers 2012. The movie consists of a multi-layered complex conflict between all the characters, but the overall conflict is the heroes versus Loki, who leads an alien invasion, and the movie ends with Loki being defeated. Note that the bigger threat of the alien invasion was also resolved before Loki. If I were to change the major conflict of the Avengers into the forms of Shang-Chi, it would be bringing in Thanos. In Act 3, Thanos is revealed to be controlling or supplying Loki with the help and comes to Earth himself. After Loki is defeated, the heroes battle Thanos and defeat him, Thanos being something that is barely within the audience knowledge. His defeat would not be impactful at all. Not only does this decision undermine the impact of Loki, it also gives Thanos little time to fully express the character. And unironically, this is exactly what happened in Shang-Chi. Since I mentioned one of the movies made by Joss Whedon as a good example of conflicts, let's introduce another one of his works that is severely over-criticized, which is what is now known as Justice League. 2017 Justice League was a movie mostly directed by Zack Snyder and finished by Joss Whedon. One of the biggest decisions Joss Whedon made was to cut out anything related to Darkseid, cutting out an unnecessary conflict from the quote-unquote original visions of Zack Snyder. Setting all other variations aside, this decision ultimately resulted in the major conflict being smoother than Snyder Cut, by only keeping Steppenwolf as the sole villain of the story. I'll leave it to you guys to decide which movie is better, as I am not here to do an analysis on Justice League and Snyder Cut. So let's move on. Just to bring it back to Shang-Chi, the conflicts in this movie are not well-rounded enough to even be compared to the infamous Justice League. One other very important part of storytelling is the perspective of the narrative. From whose eyes are the audience looking at the story with? Often you see this perspective change in the novel, where authors will shift perspectives with a different chapter to get a more well-rounded view of the different characters and the world. However, in filmmaking, shifting perspectives is much harder to do due to the relative length of films. Most films in modern day range from an hour and a half to 3 hours, but that is still nowhere comparable to the length of a novel like A Song of Ice and Fire. This is the reason why if someone were to ever make a movie from the book, it wouldn't be good as you're probably only able to tell one side of the story. Game of Thrones was made as a TV series for a reason, and part of the reason is because the multi-dimensional perspectives George R.R. Martin gave in his books. This is also the same reason why movies usually take the perspective of only one character. Movies simply do not have enough runtime to cover the perspectives of all the factions. In Shang-Chi, the movie wanted to take the perspective of, well, the main character, Shang-Chi. At the same time, the movie also uses Katie as the character that the audience can relate to, but she is merely a side character. Narratively speaking, Shang-Chi's actions in this movie doesn't actually give him enough story to hold his own perspective. Shang-Chi's actions are reactions to what Wenwu is doing. In other words, a passive character, a passive story. If you instead look through the lens of Wenwu, he looks more like the protagonist because he is the active character. Wenwu sent his men to retrieve his children's necklace so he can go to Ta Lo to save his wife and restore the family. On the other hand, Shang-Chi fights his father's men, then goes to Macau because he wants to protect his sister from his father. Then they escape the compound and go to Ta Lo before his father can arrive to stop his plan. The perspective of Wenwu makes more sense to be the main perspective the audience engage with. The movie also gives us the perspectives of Xialing for some of the scenes, which makes the movie have 3 major perspectives and 1 less major perspective. This is a lot for a solo movie, but this shouldn't directly mean it is a bad thing. A good movie that integrates multiple perspectives are considered as strengths. Usually these different perspectives are used to show plot twists, but Shang-Chi has none. No major plot twist to make the audience thrilled in their seats and rethink the entire plot from a different perspective. The diluted perspectives made Shang-Chi bland, because no perspectives were thoroughly developed enough and presented in a way for the audience to engage with.
I've mastered the ability of standing so incredibly still.
Beef or vegetarian? Roll out of the chicken, so I can only offer you beef or vegetarian.
Here you go. Oh, I was just kidding about the leg. I just need these 2 things. What? No, I thought it'd be funny. Was it funny?
Vegetarian would be great.
Yeah, same.
Okay, thank you.
That I've become invisible to the eye. Watch.
Oh. We're out of the vegetarian too. Now we only have beef.
Beef. Because that's all you have, right?
No, wait, what did he look like hopping around? I had to transfer him 30,000 units.
Movement was so slow,
Yes.
And
the beef.
2 beefs.
Modern movies, specifically Disney Marvel movies, like to have these so-called jokes dotted throughout the film. Whether these jokes work for you or not, it is not up to me to say. But what I can tell you is that some of these jokes cause a reaction completely opposite to the scene preceding it. For example, the airplane scene that I just showed you earlier, the joke completely ruins the immersion the previous scene was trying to accomplish. The scene of Shang-Chi recalling his past to Katie was a flashback exposition dump, which is supposed to be emotional, and the flight attendant forcefully cuts into the scene to deliver a joke.
This airplane joke was something that Dave Callahan pitched very early on, and it's stuck around all the way to the end. I mean, we're always like, we always hate, I think it was like, we just really hated the expository, here's the serious exposition of what my life was like being raised as an assassin, and Dave's very smart joke pitch was to hard cut to an interruption on the airplane that snaps us back into reality.
Yeah, this killed 2 birds for us because you always get these scenes, all of these movies end up having these deep backstory expository scenes, which are very hard to write without them starting to go on, and sometimes the characters are having these conversations in locations like this, and it seems totally bonkers that these 2 people are having this conversation and there's, you know, people sitting around them and whatnot. So this seemed like a fun way to sort of have fun with that idea.
I am sorry, dear director and co-writer, this might seem perfect to you, but do you see what it does? You didn't even give the audience a single second to set in the possible emotions they find from the previous scene. Instead, you sacrifice this potential sympathetic emotion for this joke. If you think the comedic value you get from this scene overcomes the sympathetic connection you can make with the protagonist of the story, you aren't watching the movie seriously. All they needed to do was to make the scene last a few seconds longer for the emotions to set in. As I have already mentioned earlier, this is now a very common thing for the directors at Hollywood to do. If you have recently watched a sci-fi movie called Dune, chances are you didn't like it. There was one joke throughout the movie, and most of it was extremely serious stuff. Character work, world building, all sorts of immersive elements for the writers and a more knowledgeable audience to enjoy. But not exactly for the casual audiences that go into theaters to watch a movie looking to relieve some stress to have fun. Movies are one form of escapism, and whether that means a meaningful story in a well-built fantasy world, Jackie Chan punching some bad guys, or Kevin Hart making bad jokes, they are all some sort of escapism. Dune is a movie with a very consistent tone, and it doesn't juggle with the overall tone just to make the audience laugh. It does this to try to keep the immersions offered by the source writer Frank Herbert. Based on the box office of Dune, it is evident to say that Dune is not as successful as many other futuristic fantasy movies like Star Wars. So it is not the best choice to not have any of these kinds of jokes in the movie. Many modern audiences equate entertainment with comedy, which is completely fine. That is the reason why the Avengers movies were so successful. There are no inherent issues with comedy within the movie, but some of the so-called comedy drags on for longer than necessary. This is prevalent in the works of James Gunn, where the jokes would run on for a few seconds longer after the comedic value has been extracted by the scene.
Taserface! What was your second choice? Scrotum hat?
My friend Sty Games calls this a gun moment. Quite cleverly named, I must say. The issue with this phenomenon is that it is a near complete tonal disaster. You go from emotional to being comedic, then to nothing. you have a few seconds up to a quarter minute of emotionless, toneless content. Drawing back to the airplane scene in Shang-Chi, after they forcefully shoved in the beef or vegetarian joke, they reintroduced the flight attendant lady about 3 seconds later to deliver the same joke. Except now they don't have vegetarian. Not only is this a gun moment, this is an insult to the flight attendant's character. She was not even intelligent enough to tell the passengers that they can only offer beef because they are out of vegetarian as well. She had to rely on Katie to tell her that. This is not a real person. This is some sort of made up caricature to specifically deliver the joke not once, but twice. Dear Director Destin Daniel Cretton, this decision is not only an insult to the audience to give a toneless scene for this long of a runtime, it is also an insult to your own work, your own creations.
In the last 7 or so months, I have changed my mind on several MCU films. I learned that plenty of them were not even close to as good as I remember them to be. It's part of why I try to view every new MCU product under an objective lens to this day. I did not watch Shang-Chi while it was in theaters, as the absolute garbage fire that is Phase 4 left me worried that it would be just another mess to add to the pile. Instead, when it came to Disney+, a family member asked if I wanted to watch it with them, and so I did. They liked it and called it one of their favorite comic book movies. And I kinda liked it. That is, until some friends informed me about the abundance of problems that made it worse than I thought. Plenty of which I didn't notice on my first watch through. The movie is littered with plot holes, out of character moments, general inconsistencies, and truly stupid scenes. Honestly, I'm more disappointed that I didn't notice a lot of these problems until after I watched it. It's a real shame too, because I wanted it to be so good that I could proclaim that it was the best piece of MCU content since Guardians 2. Unfortunately, seeing as Endgame director Joe Russo recently confirmed in an interview that Kevin Feige doesn't plan anything with the MCU, I can't imagine something like that coming up for the next few years. Unfortunately, things don't end there. What If is painful to watch, Hawkeye is average at best, No Way Home was carried by a selection of good moments, and Eternals deserves to be burned at the stake. Yet the majority of viewers boldly claim that this is the best state the MCU has ever been in. Because what? The multiverse is finally here? Oh boy. If you want to watch something that will have its own series soon, and is rumored to eventually be part of its own pseudo-cinematic universe, watch Arcane. It's a lot better than what we have in the MCU this time around, I can promise you that.
After bringing up the waste of runtime, I can't help myself but to explore the deleted scenes in this movie. There are many scenes that were deleted, which would have resulted in the movie being, well, better, more explained, more connected, more complete. These deleted scenes were uploaded by YouTube channel Child Logic Labs, who has now privated all their videos. There are lots of them, so I do have them categorized for you. We have a scene of Wenwu talking to his right-hand man about their operations in Afghanistan. And then they mention how they have exterminated the gang that shows up later in the movie. And Wenwu spares the life of the last person alive, being the leader. This scene gives more character to Wenwu, that he is not pure evil, he has mercy, he isn't just a psychopath. Which would have made his decision later to burn down the village in Ta Lo more meaningful, as well as the line about Afghanistan properly connecting the 10 rings to the one in Iron Man 1. Next up in line is a bunch of scenes that add much more character to Razor Fist. Wenwu explains how Razor Fist came to be a part of his army. and how Razorfist is much more like another son of his. There is also another scene where he sacrifices himself so Katie can get a bow to shoot the Dweller in Darkness. I assume this is an alternative shot to the one where Guangbo dies. This certainly means more to the plot, and adds more flavor to the character of Razorfist. If you have ever wondered what the relationship between Shang-Chi and Katie actually is, there are 2 deleted scenes that explores this topic. The simple answer is Shang-Chi has a crush on Katie, and Katie thinks they're just friends. The classic friend-zone relationship. The movie itself is completely vague when it comes to this, suggesting that there is some sort of romance between the two. One of them is an extended scene after their first dinner with their friend Sue. The other is a conversation between Xialing and Katie, of them talking about the relationship between Shang-Chi and Katie. The most important 2 scenes that they chose to delete actually bothered me. If you have watched my Rage video, you would know how much I hate the scenes where Xialing just breaks a wall allowing everyone to escape. This deleted scene has Trevor showing the escape tunnel, which would have made more sense than the original one. Trevor has also provided an explanation of how his relationship with Wenwu is much like that of King Lear and the Fool, which is a payoff for Trevor to be practicing a scene from King Lear when Shang-Chi and friends walk into him. This would show Trevor as a more competent person, who makes irregular decisions rather than just a laughingstock. Trevor also has another deleted scene where he rides a big mythical flying beast, charging at the Dweller in Darkness with a swarm of Chinese phoenixes. I am actually glad that I didn't get to see that in the film, and I will explain soon in the coming section. The other important scene is where Shang-Chi apologizes to Xialing. When I saw this scene, I realized what exactly was missing from Xialing's character in this movie, and it was this exact scene. Shang-Chi apologizes to Xialing, asking for forgiveness. Xialing cries and tells Shang-Chi, "The little girl you left behind would have forgiven you instantly, but I don't recognize that girl anymore." This scene adds much more depth to the character of Xialing, so she doesn't feel like a flat, meaningless side character. Sometimes when a deleted scene is shown, it is easy to understand why they are deleted. Other times you struggle to understand why they were cut. Why not delete this other scene that does nothing? These questions can only be answered by the director and the director only. No matter how good I am at movie analysis, I simply cannot answer that. Most of the time, I don't exactly like to talk about the theme of a movie, because the theme can be quite subjective. One person can get a completely different theme from a movie than another. The theme is usually the main defense that people have to defend bad movies. For the sake of clarity, since I have explored many other elements of storytelling and literary devices, I will talk about the theme. But I cannot promise you that the theme I am going to mention was experienced by you during your watch of the movie. With that in your mind, let's continue. Throughout the movie, the major theme is quite evident, and it seems to be about family. Whether you hold a darker theme of a broken family cannot be fixed, or a lighter theme of family should never abandon each other, it is about family. The main villain for most of the movie is Shang-Chi's own father, with his sister having big involvements. Because the meaningful emotional scene between Shang-Chi and Xialing was deleted, that leaves only the meaningful emotional scene between Shang-Chi and Wenwu. So the focal point is family, and it is between the father and the son. As far as our knowledge goes, this is director Destin Daniel Cretton's biggest project ever. I haven't watched his other works, and frankly, after viewing Shang-Chi, I don't wish to see another of his works. In a competent story, you don't just have theme, you have something called a through line. Whether it is plot or theme, having a through line will greatly increase the appreciation of the audience. Bringing in James Gunn once more, he is a director that would make sure a solid through line exists in his story. Taking his work Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 as an example, the thematic through line is extremely evident in this film. entire plot with Peter Quill relies on his relationship or the lack of relationship with his father. So when we do get the payoff plot twist of Ego being evil, it is ever so more meaningful to Peter and more impactful when the audience sees it. And now in Shang-Chi, you can really see a similar through line, even with a similar payoff. Except this time, the father isn't evil. The repetition of theme isn't necessarily an issue, but when you have comparison, you have competition. And this competitor within the MCU did most other things better. So maybe having a similar theme is gonna make your work even more forgetful. In terms of a thematic through line of characters, the only one that I can find is on Shang-Chi. It is about him escaping his dark past and finding a new self, which is pretty neat, if only they warranted all the random shifts in the progress. The regression of the through line happened during the night before the invasion just came out of nowhere, because they needed some meaningful character interaction. If you are still with me at this point, I am impressed, and I thank you for staying with me for this far. The following parts are about accuracy, and some people don't consider this as part of the objective analysis. So you are welcome to skip if you wish, but I promise you, you will be missing out on good content. Now let's explore what they have done with Chinese culture. If throughout this video you have ever wondered why you just heard a Chinese guy spending hours breaking down every aspect of the movie, actually let me correct myself. The movie for Asian representation in the MCU, I have an answer for you. This movie is an insult to me and my culture, more than the live action Mulan. More than I could ever imagine that I would get from a movie that is supposed to do the absolute opposite of what we got. I would like to explore Chinese culture and mythology, so if that doesn't interest you, and since this is also the second to last part, I recommend you skipping to the next chapter, which is a tangent video essay. Shang-Chi offers the audience quite a bit of material that most Western viewers would never know about Chinese culture. From slippers at home to this authentic Suzhou-style Chinese garden, the movie catches many details of Chinese culture, many things that can just slip by the corner of your eyes. I do appreciate the amount of research the team put into making this movie. They certainly did their due diligence to present the most day-to-day details of someone like me. However, due to the amount of research put in, it is only fair for me to also critique the things they didn't get right. And truthfully, they are rather insulting. In this so-called Ta Lo, there is a village. In fact, the only place we get to see is the village. This village has some Chinese-style buildings. Well, by some, I actually mean just one. All the other ones are just some straw huts they call buildings. According to Auntie Yingnan, their people have been here for 4,000 years. That is about the entire length of the history of Chinese architecture, which I would say has shifted greatly from the first building ever made. Just compare a Tang or Song dynasty style building, which looks very Japanese in style. Well, the Japanese did copy them, but that's not the point here. To a Ming or Qing dynasty style building, the architectural differences between a few hundred years are drastic. And Ta Lo is 4,000 years. But they look like a weird adaptation of a Qing dynasty palace. Early Chinese architecture didn't have strict regulations of glazed roof tiles, but during the Qing dynasty it was highly regulated. Only the properties of the emperor or past emperors can use yellow, so the royal palace and the tomb of the past emperors have yellow ones. Green is used by the nobility, so all the people with the title of kings use those tiles. Sky blue is usually used in ceremonial buildings, and the civilians mostly use black ones. Previous to the Ming and Qing dynasty, the roof tiles weren't exactly colorful. Most used were black, like the Tang-style buildings. This building here in Ta Lo is in yellow, and it indicates it should be of royalty, but I don't think they are. The type of bulge you see from the top of this building isn't exactly a prevalent style in Chinese architecture. with only some structures in the Forbidden City having them, and one of them is a Tiananmen. But the angle of the bulge is completely off. This type of angle is mostly found in double-layered ones, like the Tiananmen. Single-layer ones like this from Tang Dynasty only exhibit a tiny bulge. The curvature of the corners of the roofing also only exhibit the style during the Song Dynasty. You have probably also glanced past these tiny objects on the corner of the roofing, which is fine. Not everyone pays attention to details all the time. These little objects are called seated beasts. During early periods of Chinese architecture, that of the Han Dynasty, there are no seated beasts on the roof. By the time of Song Dynasty, they do exist because they were mentioned in poems. The ones during Song Dynasty use a total of even numbers, but the later architectural trend during the Qing Dynasty added an extra one to the very front, and it is called the Immortal, making the total number odd. This little Immortal is of a larger size than the seated beasts, so it is easy to distinguish. The ones on this building in Ta Lo is of an even number of 6, but it also includes the Immortal at the very front, and you can tell because of its larger size. The rest of the building is also just a mixture of hundreds of years of Chinese architecture that I think you guys can understand by now. All I can say is, I am extremely disappointed. I spent about half an hour researching this. This movie was funded by hundreds of millions of dollars and a team of hundreds. The first impressions of both of my parents are to say that this building is something from Southeast Asia, well, the building style of the Chinese descendants there, and not from China. So to conclude, this is not an accurate Chinese style building. It is a mixture of thousands of years of Chinese architectural history. I have learned some things that I didn't know through this movie, and it is of this headless, six-legged winged beast. This mythological creature is called Dijiang, along with their god Huntun. They represent chaos. Now, it is common for Chinese people to not recognize mythological beasts. Frankly, there are thousands of them recorded in the classics of mountain and seas, and not many people actually read them. Only a few mythological beasts are popular in Chinese culture, and many of them are the Legend 5 Sons of Dragons. Speaking of dragons, the writers mentioned the dragons in their audio commentary. Take a listen to this.
I don't remember if this is how we ended up on that name, but I do remember talking to my mom, who's Chinese, when we started this process and telling her there's probably going to be a dragon in this movie, and she was like, okay, but it has to be a good guy. And I said, why? And she said, because dragons are protectors. I thought, okay, good note.
Thanks,
Scratch out Shang-Chi punches a dragon out of the third act. Cancel that.
Thank you, mom of co-writer. You actually helped to make the movie respect Chinese culture more. The original depiction of a Dijiang describes it having 6 legs, no face, with wings. But one detail that the movie decided to forego is its red skin. For what reason, I have no clue, possibly for marketing purposes. They also decided to include a 9-tailed fox, which many people didn't know were originally Chinese. They used the famous mythical beast Qilin for a chuckle, making fun of it as a weird-looking horse, and it also makes horse noises. These things are not horses. At the maximum, they are dragon deers. And the last one, which also triggered me the most, are these firebirds. In Western mythology, these things are known as phoenixes. But in Chinese mythology, there is only one bird on fire, and it is called Zhu Quan, one of the 4 primordial beasts that represents fire and is seated in the south. That firebird is a very, very large bird, and there is only one of it. But these ones in the movie are credited as the more commonly known Feng Huang. Just for clarification, actual historical depictions of these mythological beasts do not mention them being on fire. They're just birds with very flashy feathers. So shame on you for spreading misconceptions. Whoever made these, you couldn't have spent 10 minutes researching Chinese mythological beasts, can you? If you find this section informative, I am glad that I am able to share some information with you guys. The point is, the amount of details they show prove that they did research, but if they actually did, why were these other insulting decisions made? Was there research or not? Were they trying to respect Chinese culture if there was research? These are questions that would never be answered. And I do hope now you understand what I meant by this movie insults my culture. Besides these inaccuracies, there is also one more thing that insults more than my culture. It insults anyone who is invested in the name Mandarin. It was clear that the name Mandarin was invented by Aldrich Killian as a puppet to attract public attention from his own company. But in the one-shot All Hail the King, the idea was flipped, because the real Mandarin is pissed that his name is stolen by someone who doesn't care about his name. Going by the age of Wenwu, it would seem like he's a very knowledgeable person. What is the evidence? Well, this person controls the world, and he also speaks English for some reason. I have no idea why someone of his status values the learning of English so much he cared to ask his children to learn at a young age. I think I might just have to ignore the fact that Ying Nan speaks English. This one makes absolutely zero sense at all, and even thinking about it hurts my head. Let's get straight to the point here. The word Mandarin most likely came from the Portuguese word Mandarim, and that came from the Malay word Menteri, which came from the Sanskrit word Mantrin, meaning counselor or minister. The word was used by the Portuguese traders to call the bureaucrats of the Chinese Empire during the Imperial Age. If now you're wondering where the name of the language Mandarin came from, well, when the Portuguese traded in Macau, where the local people speak Cantonese, but when the Portuguese encountered the bureaucrats, or the Mandarins, they all spoke the language of the capital. Therefore, the language itself was named Mandarin. In terms of how the orange and the chicken dish got their name, the orange was thought to have come from China, which is kind of correct. The scientists think they were first domesticated around the area, and it is mass-produced in China in modern day. So the Europeans named it Chinese apple. In Swedish specifically, they called it Mandarin apple. And in terms of the name of the chicken, it is just a chicken dish made with dry orange peels. So, my dear Wenwu, why would you assume they used the title Mandarin from the name of an orange and a chicken dish, and not from the name that Europeans used to call Chinese bureaucrats? And of course, they did use it in an attempt to make jokes, but at the expense of sacrificing Wenwu's intelligence and wisdom, as well as retconning the previous establishments which implied he cared about the name. Many would consider the previous part to be irrelevant in terms of objective analysis. You are more than welcome to think that. After all, objectivity is a spectrum. Many don't even consider the theme to be part of the objective analysis. For me, I didn't choose to dive into the cinematography, the filmmaking process, and the music, because those are not areas where I can show expertise in, nor am I even sufficient and confident enough to cover them. I don't consider those as parts of my objective analysis, but I do consider accuracy to be part of mine, which includes things like scientific accuracy and historical accuracy. Many would say that since this is fictional and or adaptation, accuracy isn't relevant. I will tell you it is as relevant as the people presenting them. If the writers decide to use historical figures, they should portray them as accurately as possible, both to respect the historical figures and not cause any misconceptions. At the same time, this would also make the world more immersive and convincing to the audience. However, there is one exception, or at least one that I can think of right now, which is when the character has to act a certain way due to the structure of the plot and the character. For example, using my favorite alternative history movies, Anonymous, as an example, they propose the Oxfordian theory of Edward de Vere being behind all of the Shakespearean works. For people who don't know, some alternative historians heavily question how Shakespeare, a person with no excessive education, can produce such advanced poetic works. Instead of embracing the brilliance of one man, these alternative historians places the works on one Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, who was a well-educated noble and a favorite of Queen Elizabeth I. A few of his poems and letters survived, and have been claimed to have parallels to that of Shakespeare. If you would like to know more about this, I recommend you watching that movie and read more on the Oxfordian theory. No matter if the theory convinces you or not, it is still considered as an alternative history, and therefore would be considered inaccurate. The reason why this stands perfectly fine for me is that the entirety of the theory is the plot of the movie itself. Also, not to mention that the incredible accuracy in terms of clothing, architecture, and the portrayal of the Queen. If this movie sparks interest in the audience, they would conduct further reading, such as Googling it or just reading off of Wikipedia, and they will find out that it is just a theory. My most enraging experience of historical accuracy in movies happened during my watch through of The Kingsman, the 2021 film that is the prequel to the earlier Kingsman franchise. Most of the inaccuracies were fine with me, as it was integral to the plot. Things like the secret organization that controls the entire world also controls the plot. The existence of one Duke of Oxford, not to be confused with the Earl of Oxford mentioned earlier, being the brother of King George V is also okay, as it was a fictional invention who is the main character. What I do take issues with is the three monarchs, King George, Kaiser Wilhelm, and Tsar Nicholas. They were all portrayed as significantly shorter than the others. While we don't know the real height of Kaiser Wilhelm, we do know the height of King George and Tsar Nicholas, who were 168 centimeters or 5'6", and 170 centimeters or 5'7" respectively. Kaiser Wilhelm should not be far from this number. This might appear quite short for modern time, but they were average if not above average for the period. Even if they were significantly shorter than the men around them, they would not make themselves appear to be short or shorter than the others by wearing very high heels. This inaccuracy could have been done to undermine the so-called idea of the divinity of the monarchs. This was a common thing that was done during the French Revolution, where the people started drawing humiliating images of the king to show that he's nothing more than a man. That was done during a period where the people thought the monarchs were some sort of superhumans. So this cannot be their intention. This means the only purpose of this was for comedic values. To me, this is absolutely outrageous. This shows a very low level of research, or it was researched, but it was chosen to be deliberately done like this. Another inaccuracy is that of Kaiser Wilhelm. The movie did get the hand right, but not his accent. Kaiser Wilhelm II spent much time in England when he was young, as his mother is English and he's also the oldest grandchild of Queen Victoria. It was known that he solely communicated in English with his mother and spoke English without an accent. This is some uncommon knowledge, but it could be done with a single Google search. This is absolutely unacceptable. The reason is that the majority of the people believe every media that is laid out in front of their eyes, and as the people who are presenting this to the masses, you serve as the entertainer and also the educator. For example, most people believe that the 300 Spartans, and only the 300 Spartans, defended Greece at the Battle of Thermopylae. But in reality, about 7,000 people from all over Greece fought alongside the Spartans. And the sole reason for this common misconception originated from Zack Snyder's movie The 300. Also to mention the existence of this pseudoscience-based documentary called Ancient Alien, cherry-picking tales from myth to support their claims of the existence of ancient aliens. Most people who aren't experts would probably be convinced, and this is absolutely disgusting. To see that these alternative history media, who also infests YouTube, channels like Bright Insight and Uncharted X get more attention than actual historians who base their arguments and logic, like the channel World of Antiquity. If you are interested in the theory of ancient aliens, I recommend you to check out the debunking videos made by World of Antiquity. They are quite informative. I hope I have provided enough reasons for why accuracy is important. I use historical accuracy as this is my area of expertise. But the same should also apply to things like paleontology, physics, chemistry, and yes, even comic accuracy. But remember, I am okay with inaccuracies when it is integral to the plot or character. They are unacceptable when the inaccuracies are not of importance. Having the story be unengaging by breaking the immersion of the fantasy is a weakness. For most of the audience, watching a movie is a form of escapism, where different people can be immersed in different types of worlds. If you have recently watched the movie The Northman, being a movie that I have watched during the production of this video, I felt like I had to include it. The movie did such a great job at creating historical fantasy that seemed extremely realistic, because everything besides the plot and character was portrayed as historically accurate as possible. All the attires, all the buildings, all the weapons used are all based on actual historical knowledge known about this period of time. Even though the story was mostly fictional, the immersion created by the historically accurate surrounding objects make the story seem more realistic, and therefore more investment is possible. The reason why some loves medieval fantasy like The Lord of the Rings is because that type of settings is more interesting to certain audience. But when the immersion is broken, let's say Samwise Gamgee pulls out an assault rifle and mows down the orcs, the movie will leave the audience clueless and confused because their immersion is absolutely broken. Accuracy is integral to the immersion, but different people accept accuracy differently. Some get triggered because the science is wrong. Some get triggered because the history is wrong. While accuracy is certainly not as important as things like character and plot, it is still something that the writers should strive for. Years ago, back during phase 2 or 3 of the MCU, if someone were to tell me that there is a superhero movie with an Asian lead releasing soon, I would be very hyped. I mean, I was even hyped when they released WandaVision. I thought the first half was okay on the first viewing. Then came the release of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Black Widow, and then Loki. One worse than the other. By the time Shang-Chi released, I held zero hope of it actually being good, and I was right. I don't know whether to be happy for being right or be disappointed because of this movie. Whenever someone tells me that nothing is perfect, and if you pause and look deep enough, there will always be issues. That I do know and do agree with. Nothing is ever perfect. But it shouldn't be the standard for settling. This is the reason why I did this analysis, so the people who have watched this will know what to or what not to do in the future. And that is the point of objective analysis. As long as there are any facts to be established, an object analysis is possible. It is impossible to be 100% objective, which is fine. No one wants to explore all the minuscule criticisms to dilute the focus from what is important. After all, it is nitpicking, right? This movie is the equivalent of Black Panther for the Asian population, but they screwed up in almost every aspect. I'm not saying Black Panther is good, but it made money and at least made many of the black population happy that they got a black African superhero. Shang-Chi tried to do that, but Marvel failed miserably. They failed to come up with any good characters, they failed to write a competent story that unfolds logically, they failed to establish a convincing world within the already colorful universe of the MCU. They failed to make a logical power scale. They failed to produce competent character conflicts. They failed to construct an interesting perspective. They failed to keep the tone intact. They failed to delete the right scenes and cut out many relevant and better scenes. They failed to create their own theme and through line. They insulted my culture after tons of research. This movie is almost unacceptably insulting, being something funded by hundreds of millions of dollars and a team of hundreds if not thousands to research and knowingly produce these insulting decisions. Shame on you, Marvel. Shame on your greed. Hey there, thank you for watching all the way to the end. I am Guai and welcome to my series called The Death of Marvel. I hope you enjoy this format. It is more intended for education than entertainment. And I also hope you have at least learned something from this video. If you would like any changes in the future format, let me know in the comments. I have plenty on my list to continue this series, like Eternals and Black Widow, as well as hopefully plenty more to come. Looking directly at you, Multiverse of Madness, I haven't heard much good about you, and for that, I will see you guys soon. Including the biggest shit ever created in the Star Wars universe. Wait, did I say shit? The power scale in this movie is one of the biggest muddles of what? Muddle. Oh, muddle's a pud. Oh my god, there's no way I said that. What is a muddle and what is a pud? In Swedish specifically.